I found 10 war movies that were actually directed by people who served in the military. Some of these guys flew bombing runs in World War II. One survived a real firefight in Vietnam. Another saw the liberation of a concentration camp. These are the films that came out of that. Robert Altman was 18 when he joined the Army Air Forces during World War II. He became a bomber pilot, flew a B-24 Liberator over the Pacific. By the end of the war, he'd flown more than 50 combat missions. When he came home, he had this deep hatred for military bureaucracy. He'd seen how absurd the whole system was from the inside. Fast forward to 1969. Vietnam's happening and Altman gets offered MASH. It's supposed to be about Army surgeons during the Korean War, but Altman wasn't really interested in making a movie about Korea. He wanted to talk about Vietnam, and he wanted to show what war actually feels like when you're in it. The studio executives at Fox freaked out when they saw what he was shooting. The dialogue overlapped, people improvised, the operating room scenes were covered in blood. They wanted him to cut most of it, but Altman wouldn't do it. MASH came out and became one of the biggest movies of 1970. Won the top prize at Cannes Film Festival. Got 5 Oscar nominations, 1 for Best Adapted Screenplay, and then it turned into this massive TV series that ran for 11 seasons. Joseph Sargent fought in the Battle of the Bulge, one of the worst battles of World War II. He survived it, but years later he'd describe it as hell on earth. In 1989, he directed this TV movie called Day One about the Manhattan Project, the race to build the atomic bomb, the decision to use it on Japan. It followed General Leslie Groves and Robert Oppenheimer through the whole thing. The movie won an Emmy and got praised for being historically accurate, but what made it different was how Sargent approached it. He didn't treat it like some abstract history lesson. He'd seen the war up close. He knew the decisions being made weren't theoretical exercises. Real people had to make them and live with what happened. Sargent hadn't worked on the Manhattan Project, obviously, but his combat experience gave him this understanding of what was actually at stake. It's a TV movie, so it doesn't get talked about much, but people who've seen it say it's one of the best films ever made about the nuclear age, specifically because of how human Sargent made it feel. Oliver Stone enlisted in the Army in 1967. He was 21 years old and he specifically requested combat duty in Vietnam. He served with the 25th Infantry Division and then the 1st Cavalry Division, saw heavy fighting along the Cambodian border. He was wounded twice, earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for valor. And almost 20 years after he'd come home, he made Platoon. It follows this young volunteer named Chris who gets thrown into Vietnam. There's a split in his platoon between 2 sergeants, Elias, who's compassionate, Barnes, who's ruthless, and Chris has to figure out what kind of soldier he's going to be. The character is basically Stone himself, college dropout who volunteers, starts out with ideals, gets torn apart by what he sees. Stone has said it's his Vietnam War from a grunt's perspective. When Platoon came out, people said it was the most authentic Vietnam film ever made. Got 8 Oscar nominations, won 4 including Best Picture. Stanley Kubrick watched it and said it was the first military film where you actually believed what was happening on screen. William Wyler flew bombing missions over Germany in 1944. Not because he had to. He was a filmmaker, he could have stayed home, but he volunteered for the Army Air Forces and went up in B-17s to shoot footage for a documentary called The Memphis Belle. The high-altitude explosions during those missions left him partially deaf. He came back from the war changed, physically and mentally, and he had this story he needed to tell about what happens when soldiers come home. The Best Years of Our Lives follows 3 servicemen returning from World War II. The film is about the struggle to readjust to civilian life when everything feels different and wrong. Wyler insisted that everybody working on the film had to be a veteran or connected to the war somehow. The cinematographer Greg Toland was a veteran. Harold Russell, who played the sailor with no hands, was an actual veteran amputee who'd lost his hands in the war. Wyler wanted people on set who understood what he was trying to capture. And it worked. The film came out in 1946 and audiences were devastated by it. The Best Years of Our Lives won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Martin Scorsese still calls it one of the greatest works of American cinema. Before World War II, George Stevens made light comedies and musicals. He was good at it, made successful films, had a solid career going. And then he joined the Army Signal Corps in 1943, and everything changed. Stevens headed a film unit that documented combat operations. He filmed the D-Day landings in Normandy. He shot footage all across Europe as Allied forces pushed into Germany. And then in April 1945, his unit arrived at Dachau concentration camp right after it was liberated. Stevens filmed what he saw there. The footage was later used as evidence in the Nuremberg trials. People who knew him said the experience shattered him. He came back from the war and couldn't make the same kind of movies anymore. In 1959, Stevens directed The Diary of Anne Frank. It's an adaptation of the famous diary written by a Jewish girl hiding from the Nazis in Amsterdam. Anne Frank and her family spent 2 years in an attic living in constant fear until someone betrayed their hiding place. The film earned 8 Oscar nominations and won 3, including Best Supporting Actress for Shelley Winters. The American Film Institute later named it one of the most inspiring American films ever made. David Ayer grew up in a military family. Both his grandfathers fought in World War II, so Ayer enlisted in the Navy, served as a submarine sonar technician following in his grandfather's footsteps. Years later, when he made Fury, Ayer said he wasn't interested in making another war movie about action and equipment. He wanted to capture what he actually remembered about military service. The guys he served with, the weird characters, the specific kind of bond that forms between people under that kind of stress. He called it a brotherhood that doesn't occur in any other setting. Fury follows a 5-man American tank crew in the final months of World War II. They're led by a battle-hardened Sargent played by Brad Pitt, and they're thrust behind enemy lines fighting desperate battles against Nazi troops. The film builds to this climactic last stand where they're completely outnumbered. What makes it different is how dirty it is. Mud, blood, moral compromises. The film doesn't glamorize any of it. Quentin Tarantino put it on his list of best films of 2014 because of its intensity. Critics praised it for being honest about what combat actually looks like. Clint Eastwood made 2 movies about the Battle of Iwo Jima back-to-back. Flags of Our Fathers told the American side. Letters from Iwo Jima told the Japanese side. The Japanese one ended up being way better. The film follows General Kiribayashi and his soldiers defending the island in 1945. They know they're going to lose, but they fight anyway. It's entirely in Japanese with an all-Japanese cast led by Ken Watanabe. When it came out, critics in Japan said something fascinating, that it took an American director to tell their story with this much compassion. Some people think it's one of the best war films ever made. Eastwood had served in the military, but his experience was nothing like what's shown in the film. He got drafted during the Korean War in 1951, but he never saw combat. He spent his time at Fort Ord in California working as a lifeguard and swimming instructor. His closest brush with danger was surviving a plane crash in the Pacific, which apparently gave him a real respect for what soldiers and airmen go through. John Boorman made a war movie about a 10-year-old kid who thought the Blitz was awesome. Hope and Glory is basically Boorman's childhood during the German bombing of London in 1940 and 1941. The main character is this kid named Billy, and to him the nightly bombings are scary but also exciting. There are fireworks in the sky, a bomb destroys his school so he gets days off. The whole city becomes this strange adventure. This actually happened to Boorman. He was that age during the Blitz. A lot of the film comes directly from his memories. His family's house burning down, the school getting hit. He said it's his most personal film. Boorman's military story is pretty interesting. He got conscripted in the 1950s during the Korean War era. Never saw combat though. They made him a clerical instructor in England, and part of his job was teaching history to young soldiers. So he starts researching the Korean War for these lectures, and he realizes the whole thing was basically avoidable and pointless. He shared this with the soldiers he was teaching. So British intelligence, MI5, decided he was a subversive communist and came down on him. He ended up getting court-martialed for criticizing the war while he was still in uniform. December 1945. World War II just ended. John Ford releases a war movie, and it's not a celebration at all. It's more like a funeral. They Were Expendable follows the squadron of Navy boat crews in the Philippines during the early desperate part of the war. Robert Montgomery and John Wayne play officers using these small fast boats to harass the Japanese and evacuate commanders. At one point, they evacuate General MacArthur. But the whole point of the film is that their efforts can only delay the inevitable. They're going to lose. The title basically tells you these men are expendable. Ford wasn't just some Hollywood director. In 1942, at age 48, he volunteered for the Navy and became a commander in the Office of Strategic Services. He headed up their field photographic unit. He filmed at Omaha Beach on D-Day and got wounded by shrapnel. He filmed behind enemy lines at Midway. By the end of the war, he had multiple decorations and eventually retired as a Navy captain. John Huston made a 32-minute documentary about the U.S. Army taking one small Italian village from the Germans in December 1943. When he finished it, the Army looked at it and immediately classified it as secret. Huston was a captain in the Army Signal Corps during World War II. By 1943, he was in Italy with a film crew attached to the Fifth Army. His official mission was making documentaries for the war effort, but what he actually wanted was to show what war really looked like. San Pietro doesn't look like other war documentaries from that time. You've got infantry slogging through mud in the mountains, artillery hitting buildings, guys getting carried off wounded, civilians coming out of the ruins. Huston's narrating in this very flat, matter-of-fact way, explaining how one regiment took over 1,100 casualties just to capture this one village. And then he shows something that basically never appeared in World War II documentaries: footage of dead American soldiers in body bags. The Army brass watched it in 1944 and decided it was too depressing for people to see during the war. They locked it away, classified it. Eventually, they showed it to troops privately as a training film to prepare them for what combat was actually like. They released it to the public only in 1945 when the war was ending.